Welcome to Product Academy Tough Stuff, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get straight to the toughest challenges in product management. I'm Tanja Lau.
And I'm Francesca Cortesi.
In each episode, we tackle one tough question. No fluff, no filler. Just candid insights from seasoned product leaders.
Our guests deliver actionable, real-world answers. Whether you're an experienced product leader or just stepping into the product world, this is your go-to podcast for sharp, tested advice, condensed for your busy schedule.
One tough challenge, practical insights, short and real.
Let's dive in.
Hello, Petra. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Great. So I read something on LinkedIn recently, where it said people join a company, but they leave a manager. And that's why we're here today talking about how to turn our bosses into better leaders and how to manage up. That's a fancy new term, maybe not so new, but fancy. Is it different than just giving feedback? So what does this term even mean to you?
Yeah, so for all of us having a boss, I think it is really an important thing to really deliberately and consciously managing that connection. And in my product coaching experience, this oftentimes is not the case, right? So I'm coaching product leaders and I know that they're so, seeking for feedback from their direct reports, but it is really not often reaching them, this feedback. Or sometimes it's more complaints or the occasional, just like, hey, this is not ideal at the water cooler or something like that, even the virtual water cooler these days. But still, I think it is really highly beneficial for both parties, so to say, if you really, as an individual contributor, as a product person, manage this relationship with your boss with intention. Because oftentimes they have so much influence on the system around you. So how the product is actually built or ways of working is something they could be helping you curate more of or design more of. And peer alignment, so usually they have your boss has peers and they can help you with the engineering lead or with the design leadership person to convince them of stuff, to inform them about things. So really make use of your boss, so to say, make them an ally. And that is actually something that I really thought a lot about this year. So how can we make sure that leaders get the feedback they deserve and that individual contributors really get the most out of this relationship, this boss relationship? And that's where managing up as a term comes from, because it says it's an active thing that you have to do. And that's basically how I define the term, so to say.
Yeah, great. And I guess there's also different ways to deliver feedback, both directly and indirectly in a way, right? You can come with requests, but you can also offer feedback. There's different ways to interact. So let's talk about all of these things bit by bit. One thing that I am very curious about is there's lots of benefits of managing up and really shaping the relationship with your boss. But still, you were saying lots of leaders don't get a lot of feedback. And that's also my experience in one of my past companies. The leadership team, the C-level, even had dedicated meeting slots every week, open door time slots where people could just walk in and just talk to them.
Amazing.
And they didn't do it. We started using these time slots for other things like deep work, but people didn't show up in 2 or 3 years. Nobody showed up at the doorstep. So why is that the case? Why do you think people don't give more feedback?
Yeah, so I asked some of these questions on LinkedIn polls and stuff like that throughout the course of this year. And I think predominantly so first of all, people don't understand that it's a thing that their leaders actually would love to hear. And you said you did it, you had a session and people still were not making use of it. That oftentimes is because it is so hard for them to understand what they can expect rightfully from their leadership team. So no individual contributor usually has sat down and consciously reflected on what actually is my leadership or my boss's responsibilities, right? So there was one part of the thing that I did this year is I created a definition of what people can expect from their leaders. For example, 1 out of 10 things that I'm mentioning usually is kind of this providing you with directional clarity. So that's a leadership thing. And in some organization, it is the leader needs to come up with a product strategy. In some organizations, I know the product people do the product strategy, but still then there needs to be a company strategy or quarterly goals or whatever helps you to understand what to say yes to opportunity-wise. So this is the direction that we are all looking into and all working towards, a focal point, so to say. And then there are the other things that we say no to. And this is, for example, something that you can rightfully expect from your boss. And if this is something that they're not doing, it's way easier for the people to provide a leader with feedback, because they can then say like, hey, I think you should actually provide me with more directional clarity. I'm lacking directional clarity. So maybe can I give you some feedback on what would help me regards directional clarity and stuff like that. And therefore, it's super important that IC-level folks, and that's something you could do tomorrow, just take a blocker in your calendar, 20 minutes, and really reflect on, hey, what are the things that I think my boss should actually help me with? And that may help you to come up with feedback. All the good things as well. So things that they're already doing amazing. By the way, they don't hear that enough as well. So just if you loved how they run the last meeting or facilitated a session or set up your team offsite or whatever it is, an occasional thank you note is a cool thing. So positive feedback definitely is a thing as well. But if they fall short, if you don't like their behavior here or there, I think it still makes sense to point it out. And there can be personal feedback, or it is more this task-related, job role-related feedback. And for that, I think it helps to have, I call it a blueprint, or you can look it up on the internet. I wrote blog posts about it. So what are the 10 things that people can rightfully expect from their boss? Directional clarity is one of them. Help in your personal development is another one, for example. So if you don't get any support in your personal development, so there are no development conversations happening, then that might be another thing that you could feedback your boss upon. So create a bit of an, hey, that's my expectation towards my boss. And then if they fall short, provide them with this feedback. And if they excel, likewise, provide them with that feedback as well.
I think that's an awesome take, and we'll definitely link to your article. So there's much more to expect from your leaders, and it's good for them also to maybe have a blueprint about, where can I develop myself as a leader, because not all of them are doing that consciously either. And exactly. plus one on really giving also positive feedback and not just complaints, because I think that's something that's also really rare at the top of any hierarchical structure.
And maybe if I could add to your kind of, we had this open door sessions, but nobody came. So some of my clients had the same issue, and it helped us to create a list of questions that they could hand to their employees. Hey, for example, where do you maybe felt small after conversation with me? Where may I have not acknowledged your skills enough or something like that? So really actively asking for feedback, even the critical, challenging feedback that maybe you're kind of not so much wanting to hear. But it's another thing that I have in a blog post is, hey, what are great questions that leaders could ask their direct reports so that they get more meaningful feedback. And I think the IC level people having to think about providing their boss with feedback is just the second best option. So the better option would be leaders actively asking for feedback, and not only by providing the room for it, but by asking precise questions that makes it easier for the people to provide them with meaningful feedback.
Yeah. I agree. So there's like a spectrum. Some leaders actively ask for feedback, and from their behavior it's safe to provide feedback. It's actually something they encourage, right? And then there's some people that may not ask for feedback, but when they get it, they also respond quite positively. But if we go to the other part of the spectrum, right? What happens if I have witnessed my leader getting feedback from someone and not responding well to it, right? That's really, really disencouraging. So are there some tricks and tips to how to deliver feedback in a way that they can absorb it and not getting hurt in their egos or whatever is leading them towards this bad response?
Yeah, several tips here. So first of all, I think it makes sense to personally learn about the art of giving feedback, because this really helps your entire career. So even if you're still a junior product person, I would recommend you to do this, because it helps you with providing feedback to peers, to your team, to your leadership people. And the art of delivering feedback helps you in your personal life as well, right? So every relationship gets better if you master the art of giving feedback. And I think there are amazing frameworks out there for providing or for coming up with feedback, so to say. I would like to call out the book that is called Connect by Carol Robbins. She really, and David Bradford, they really have a big Stanford course around interpersonal relationships and the art of giving feedback, which is amazing. And they, for example, have this metaphor of, if you provide people with feedback, they make sure you stay on your side of the net. So if you imagine a tennis court and people are playing tennis with each other, you want to stay on your side of this tennis net, on your part of the court, so to say. And when it comes to feedback, they suggest that you share your observations. So this is what I've observed. This is what happened, so a situation to some extent. This is how it made me feel, and this is the impact that it had on me personally. And maybe that's another framework where they say like, and then add a suggestion, right? So then say like, hey, I would suggest us doing the following. And this is a nice structure that one could use. So first of all, what is the situation? What was the other person's behavior? And what is the impact that it had on your motivation, your work? So these kind of things. And then really focus on not speculating about your boss's motives or intentions. Don't assume, because you never know what the other people's intentions were, right? So maybe they haven't reflected on what they did to you, but it really landed bad with you because of it was not your day or something like that. So really take all of that out of the feedback situation and really say like, hey, this is my observation. There was the situation. That's what you said, because that's what they said, basically, right? They should not be upset by you pointing out what they actually said or wrote or did. And then talk about the impact that it had on you. I, by the way, still need to pull up an emotions chart when I really am about to prepare hard feedback that I'm not sure if it lands well. So then I have an emotions chart, and then I really reflect on, okay, what was the actual emotion that I had? That helps me to talk about it, because there's more nuance than this made me sad, or this made me angry, or that caused a lot of frustration. Or so it really helps to have a bit of a thing to look at, to then provide your boss with this feedback. And talk about the impact, because they never want to demotivate you, for example. That's not something that they want to see. They want you motivated. So if you say like, hey, this situation currently, there's so much unclarity in this situation for me. This really makes me anxious about the future of our team or something like that. So could you help me with a bit more clarity? That would help me ease some of my anxiety here. So this is the conversations that we need to have and that we want to have. So find a framework that works for you. The book Connect is amazing. The SBI framework, Situation, Behavior, Impact framework, created by the Center of Creative Leadership, CCL. That's another important framework. So go find one that works for you and then use that to prepare your feedback session. Because oftentimes people think like we can do this right away on the spot. This is maybe the case for positive feedback, but if it's more meaningful feedback, maybe even what some people would suggest being negative feedback, then you want to prepare it well and make sure your message lands well. And again, it depends. You were already pointing in that direction, Tanja. It depends on the psychological safety that you have in your organization and your team. So it's a really gauge if it's the right time to deliver feedback, if your boss is in the right mood to hear the feedback, figure out what is a good format for your feedback. If it's really detailed, maybe it's more an email. But if it's more personal feedback, I always would suggest having a conversation. So all of that needs to be taken into account. It's a lot of preparation needed before you maybe deliver some sort of feedback.
Great. I like how actionable this is, and it made me think of two other tips or tools that I came across in my life. One is actually from a parenting book. It's a book called Good Inside by Becky Kennedy, and there is a framework inside where she talks about the MGI, which is an acronym for the most generous interpretation. So it's kind of a frame of mind that when kids are acting out, you always assume they have good intentions and they have a reason for doing that, and the same for any other situation as well. I think it applies to leadership as well. Like even if you see your boss, I don't know, handing down priorities that you don't understand, just assume that they have the best intentions of the company at heart, and let's find out with a curious mindset where they come from, these decisions or actions that they're showing. So I think the MGI is something that I'm always trying to remind myself of. And what I also like is just as a proactive thing to do in a team is I really like the manual of me. It is like a little framework where you talk about like how do you work as a person and how do you like to receive feedback? Because for some people it might be much easier to get it asynchronously, to then think about it and then talk about it. Or maybe, first written and then verbal or whatever. So I think it's really good to also be intentional about yourself and be a real role model by shaping how you want to receive feedback and do this as a team exercise. Yeah,
I would totally agree. I created boss personas to help people tailor the feedback to their boss's need. Because, for example, if you know your boss is a massive micromanaging person, then maybe you can take advantage of that information and tailor your feedback accordingly. Or if they're a visionary person, that's an entire different feedback story, right? If somebody's a micromanager down to the task of somebody really always lives in the clouds and is thinking about the next 5 years in their head, right? And I think thinking about which of the personas they might fall into might be another idea to make sure the feedback lands well. Yeah,
that's a great segue.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the micromanager, because I know I've been there as a leader. I've fallen into that trap. I know that many people in my network, they complain about their bosses being micromanagers. So do you have any specific advice on what these people could do or how that feedback should be crafted differently than maybe for a visionary leader?
That's actually tricky to influence from the individual contributor level, right? Because that would require you to point out to your... So I think it is still an amazing thing to point out the negative impact that your micromanaging boss is having on the output of your team. And that's definitely something that you could do. So I would always recommend people to observe this. So when you get aware of such a thing, and aware of the negative input, then put that as a headline. And over 1 or 2 weeks, I would suggest like really note down specific cases where your boss's micromanaging behavior had a negative impact on your team motivation, on your motivation, on whatever it is. It could be emotions as well. We talked about that as well. Maybe it's just like annoying. That's perfectly fine. But note down really situations where this happened. And then I think you need to find some pattern in there, because micromanagement is not always the same for every boss. There's still maybe some things that are more annoying than other things. In some occasions, you may tolerate the micromanaging. In others, it's really super frustrating. So reflect on that, note down the situations, and then you can again use this feedback model to provide them with this feedback. The thing is, I think it's super hard to expect them to change immediately, because that is feedback on their personal behavior, and behavioral feedback and behavioral change always takes time. So what usually we need for something to change is pain, urgency, and the awareness that help would be available. So your boss would need to understand, okay, my micromanaging leadership style is painful for the people that I'm working with. And oftentimes your feedback is just one data point and maybe not enough data for them to really figure out, okay, it's painful, I have to change now. That would be the urgency bit, right? What you could do is you could find allies. So if all your peers have the exact same feedback, and if you jointly provide that feedback to your boss, different story, right? More data points, and them like, oh my God, it's not only painful for my people, there is a sense of urgency to it because all of them are frustrated. So that's one thing that you actually could do. And then the idea of that there is help available is important as well. Because if your boss never heard about, leaders should not be deep down in the trenches micromanaging everything. So if they think this is what leadership is all about, how should they actually see themselves being a more uplifted, maybe more visionary, maybe more, I don't know, providing guardrails type of a leadership person, right? This could be something you could expose them to. So again, I have these 10 things that leaders should be doing. You could actually provide them with this like, hey, look, you're doing these things amazing. Some of the micromanaging stuff might be still amazing for you and the organization. But there are these 8 other things that you're not even touching upon, and we're missing these things. That's lacking. So could you maybe just like focus some of your energy there, right? That could be a conversation that you have. But again, it massively depends on the psychological safety in your organization. If it's appropriate for you to deliver this kind of feedback, you could see if you can find an ally in one of their peers, and they could provide them with this viewpoint. You could dig out the leadership role descriptions. Sometimes the leadership role descriptions of your organizations talk about what leaders should actually be doing. And then that takes a bit of the personal touch out of your feedback. If you say like, hey, I just, this kind of leadership role definition just like showed up on my desk randomly. I digged it out. And I think you're doing amazing here, but these are still some things where I think you could improve or something like that. But again, this is tricky. And I personally think it's not the individual contributor's responsibility to feedback on the leadership style towards their boss. That's their boss's responsibility, right? So there should be a definition what good leadership looks like in the organization, and senior executives should make sure that all the leaders live up to that standard. Yet should the product people maybe feedback on it's not ideal? Yeah, and I think you could do this. But again, don't be depressed if the leader is not changing gears right after your feedback landed. It's just like too small of a data point and data sample.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back of a situation where I was leading a team, and I just came back from maternity leave, and it was my first day back at the office, and I realized like some backlogs were piling up, and the tests, like the code that was supposed to be shipped was not tested yet, and I felt like I needed to jump in and like immediately figure out what was going on. And then one of the senior people in my team, she took me aside and told me like, look, what you're doing here is disrupting us, so don't do that. And then I had a really honest conversation with her about like, hey, I'm just coming back from maternity leave. I'm working part-time now. I want to show that I'm still valuable here. Like I'm also under a lot of pressure. Yeah. And so like the human switch, the human connection between two people, because micromanagement for me often is a sign of fear. In me, it was a sign of fear that I'm no longer valuable. And so I think to also address it from that side, like with a loving attitude, that's also really helpful, I think.
Yeah, and it's often fear. And the other reason why leaders are often micromanagers is because that's how they learned leaders should behave. So then that's what they see, that's what they know, that's what they had. So that's what they picked up. And they just don't know that there are other options for leading with guardrails and leading with goals more, and really having this trust that the team has the best intentions and will do the best things, and really having this focus on, hey, I want to make my team, my organization as autonomous as possible. I want them to make the best possible decisions on behalf of the organization. So what do I need to provide them with that they can make decisions in their own domain? And this oftentimes, so many leaders have never thought about that being an option for their leadership practice, right? Yeah. But that's an entire different story of why leaders often are so poorly educated and trained when becoming leaders. That's maybe another podcast episode.
And yes, exactly. Another tough challenge to tackle. But we talked about direct and indirect feedback at the beginning of this episode. And I think this is also a chance to maybe provide indirect feedback also in a way that if I recognize my leader is not trusting us enough, and that's why this person is constantly micromanaging, then maybe we can also address this topic and say like, hey, I think we got this. What can we do to show you that we got this and that you don't need to worry? And also maybe explicitly, and that's one thing that I did when I learned from this situation, what can we do to define red flags? When you run into these situations, that's when you come to me and tell me, so that we can discuss it and I can take action, right? So where are these? When is it time to panic, and when is it still okay to keep doing what you're doing, right? I think that's something that we don't talk about explicitly, and that's one thing that I did after this feedback, is also figuring out, okay, like when the conversion rate drops below this level, we need to like talk, and you need to come to me, but until like within this margin, like you don't need to alert me every time when some like minor change happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. I always encourage leaders to think more in principles. So never, really, like that's a leadership rule, never ever tackle a single case in your organization. So you don't like how this particular product person is managing their backlog. You don't feedback them on this. You think about, okay, what is a good principle that I could hand my entire product organization about handling the product backlogs, right? And there's oftentimes, and there oftentimes are then, so for example, this, Marty uses that a lot. I think he has this, the bare minimum of good is we have weekly releases and weekly contact with our users. And this is what the teams actually do, and how they do it, or if they do more of it, it's fine, but this is my bare minimum. And I think you could do similar things for, okay, backlog management wise. My bare minimum is that the backlogs get prioritized, I don't know, once every other week or something like that. And then this is more a principle that you're having as a product organization. Ideally, everybody has to subscribe and commit to it first. But then you can have conversations when you see like, okay, the backlog gets super, super messy. I have no clue what they're actually doing. As a leadership person, and then you have these guardrails or principles at hand that could help you to have this conversation. So, and yeah, maybe the list gets long with all your principles, and maybe you have to let go some of them, because that's another thing, right? We scale organizations, we bring more people in for a reason. But if we bring more people in and if we scale, we need to allow them to do their work. And maybe they do things differently, and we have to embrace that they do things differently, because diversity oftentimes is our strength down the line. So that is a leadership challenge. And if you as an individual contributor get challenged a lot from your boss on this one-on-one things, I think that's great feedback to provide them with, is this kind of, hey boss, can you just go back and reflect on a principle here? So you're constantly coming with this negative feedback about me managing the backlog, but can you just like pause for a second and think about, why is this? And if there is a pattern to it, and maybe come up with some principles, how you would like me to manage the backlog, and then we can have an informed discussion about it. So maybe this in situ, hey, I had an itch, I had to scratch it. So the backlog was not beautiful, so I ran to my PM and told them, do better backlog management. This is not ideal. So maybe we can ask for a bit more longer guidance, more principle kind of an approach.
I think you just served us with the next tough question to tackle, is how to come up with product principles and with principles on how.
But that would actually, so a product principle would for me be slightly different. That's a principle about our product and our user groups, and that would be more a way of working principle in the product organization.
But awesome. I think it's a great ending for like tying it back to something bigger and looking at it from two different angles, from leadership perspective and from IC perspective. Thank you so much. Is there any last thing that you would like our listeners to take away from this episode before we close?
Actually, so if there's one thing, then it's really kind of let go of this assumption that your leader is maybe too senior to care about your feedback, because from all the leadership coaching conversations I have, and these are many, I know that they're actually keen to hear what you think. They're keen to learn about your problems, where's friction in the system, and usually they're really grateful for your feedback. So that is maybe my last words. Provide your leaders with more feedback. I think it would be amazing, and for the benefit of everybody on the team.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Petra. This was fun.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Product Academy Tough Stuff.
We hope today's tough question gave you practical, actionable insights.
If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and leave a rating or review. It will help us grow the podcast and make future episodes even better.
Got a question for us? Send an email to toughstuff@productacademy.ch and ask away. We read any submission and might answer yours in a later episode.
Thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time with another tough challenge to tackle.
Until then, take care.